A quadrilateral is any four-sided polygon. Now what I have here is I have a few vocabulary terms that we'll be using to describe these quadrilaterals, and we just want to make sure that we understand what they are and what they mean. Our first one here is parallel sides, which means lines that will never touch because they're always the same distance apart. Very much like our equal sign. These lines would be said to be parallel. Our next term is opposite sides. This refers to the top and bottom sides or the left and right sides of the shape. It's kind of a simple way to explain it, but if you look up here in this box, this left side is opposite of the right side. This side, the bottom, is opposite of the top. And our last term that we'll be using is congruent, which means exactly the same. Now this can be used to describe sides and angles, and a lot of times people will use equal in its place, so they'll say equal length sides or equal angles. So the first quadrilateral we'll be looking at is a parallelogram, and it actually has what it is in its name here. It's parallel. So the opposite sides are parallel, and there's two pairs of opposite sides. If we come down here to my sketch of a parallelogram, the way we can show parallel is if I put an arrow here and an arrow here, that would tell me that they're parallel. And then to show that the top and bottom are parallel, I can go two arrows and two arrows. So this would be a mathematical way to show that the left and right sides are parallel and the top and bottom are parallel. Now also it has opposite sides are congruent, or like I said, some some people like to say that that is equal. Now the way to show that would be very similar to the arrow. You can put like a little mark here and a single mark here. That shows, hey, these sides are congruent or equal. And then for the top, we have two marks and two marks. That shows that, hey, the lengths of these sides are the same. And the last thing that we have is the opposite angles are congruent. So that means this angle and this angle would be the exact same. And likewise, this angle and this angle. So to summarize a parallelogram, it must have, it is made up of parallel sides where opposite sides are parallel, and there are two pairs. So the left and the right are parallel, and the top and the bottom are parallel. The opposite sides are congruent, and the opposite angles are congruent. So now we're going to look at rectangles, but before we do that, we're going to need to change our thinking. So we just finished talking about parallelograms. And these terms that we are familiar with, many of us are familiar with parallelogram, and we have rectangles, and then after rectangles, we'll be talking about squares and rhombus. We need to change our thinking and use our names, not to remember what the picture looks like, but to remember our descriptors of what makes that shape exactly that shape. So you can see here we said rectangles must have. Now they have opposite sides are parallel to each other. So you can see down here in my picture, this side is parallel with the other side. So left and right are parallel, top and bottom are parallel. Awesome. The opposite sides are also congruent or equal. So again, we could come in, I'm not even going to mark that because I don't want to get our picture too crazy, but we know that the left and the right side are congruent as the top and the bottom are. And what makes a rectangle a little more specific than a parallelogram is that it has four right angles. And the way to note a right angle is demonstrated right here, where it's like a little L in the corner. That is our mathematical way to represent that 90-degree angle. Our next shape is a rhombus. A rhombus must have opposite sides are parallel. There's two pairs of parallel sides. So as I mentioned before, this is another one of those specialized parallelograms. All right. Now something that makes a rhombus a little more specific than a rectangle is in a rhombus it must have four congruent sides, which means all sides are equal. So again we can show this would be, this shows that all sides are equal, which is especially helpful when, like I did here, when you're hand drawing a shape, because it's pretty tough to be perfect, we can put those in. And then opposite angles are congruent. So again, it's just a specialized parallelogram with equal sides, which makes it more specific. And the next shape we are looking at is the square. Squares must have equal sides or parallel, both pairs, and 4 congruent sides or 4 equal sides and 4 right angles. So you can see here there's only so many ways to draw a square, but you can see we have our angles, we have those little L's or those little boxes in the corner, and we also note that all these sides are equal. So again, this is a type of parallelogram, and a square is quite interesting. A square is included both. It can be a rhombus, or it can fall in the category of a rectangle based on their properties. It can be a rhombus because all sides are equal and opposite angles are equal. It is a rectangle because opposite sides are parallel, and it has 4 right angles. Our final quadrilateral that we'll be discussing today are the trapezoids. And the first and most important thing to note is a trapezoid is not a parallelogram. And it is not a parallelogram because, as you'll see down here, a trapezoid must have exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. A parallelogram needs 2 pairs of parallel sides. So it's very important that you realize that it is not a parallelogram. And I wrote it there again. It is not a member of that parallelogram family. Now, typically what you'll see, the shapes at the bottom are your 2 types of trapezoids that you probably are familiar with. This side and this side are parallel, okay? But the issue with these other 2 sides, if you continue them going up, they will eventually cross. And that is exactly what we don't want when we're looking for a parallelogram. And to wrap up our video, I'm going to ask you a tough question here. And that question is, when is a rectangle also a rhombus? So you can give me an example of a shape or a situation when a rectangle is also a rhombus. If you listen carefully, I did give a hint to it. Please write your explanation on a piece of paper with your name and give it to me in the morning. I hope this helped.